Montana Territory. Spring of 1883, snow still clung to the Bitterroot Peaks, but the valley floor was greening when Verity Temple rode into it with nothing but a carpet bag and a letter promising work. The wind tugged loose strands of her dark hair as she stepped down from the stage in Dry Creek. Her boots hit the dirt with a thud, and she stood there a moment, trying to steady her breath. She had not slept in 2 days. Not since leaving the boarding house in Cheyenne behind, not since deciding to chase a future instead of fleeing a past. The letter clenched in her hand was creased and worn, its ink faded. But the name was still clear, Harlan Beck. She looked up as a man approached, tall, broad-shouldered, 30-something, with wind-burned cheeks and a quiet way of carrying himself. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, sun already catching the gold in his hair. His eyes, blue, sharp, met hers. "You Verity Temple?" he asked. She nodded, gripping the handle of her bag tighter. "I am." He held out a calloused hand. "Harlan Beck, I sent the letter." She shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm. "You still need the help?" she asked. He gave a slow nod. "That ranch has not run right since my wife passed, and my boys deserve better than what I have been giving them." Verity's brows lifted. "You have children, 2 sons. Gilbert is 7, Gideon is 5. They lost their mother last autumn. I think they need a woman's steadiness around." Verity did not flinch at the mention of a dead wife. She had seen enough loss to know the shape of it. Her own scars ran deep, but they stayed quiet. She gave a single decisive nod. "Then let us get to work." They rode out together in silence, the wagon creaking beneath them. The land opened up around them, rolling grass, scattered pine, the Bitterroot River cutting silver across the valley. The Beck Ranch sat low against the hillside, a long barn, a modest house with a porch, and a split-rail fence that sagged in places. 2 boys chased a dog in the yard, their laughter carrying on the wind. As they spotted the wagon, they ran toward it, kicking up dust. "Gilbert." "Gideon," Harlan called, stepping down. The boys skidded to a stop. The older one, Gilbert, narrowed his eyes at Verity. "Who is she?" "This is Miss Temple. She is going to help with the house and meals. You will treat her with respect." Gideon blinked up at her. "Do you know how to make flapjacks?" Verity crouched to meet his gaze. "I make the best flapjacks west of the Mississippi." The boy grinned. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Verity sat at the kitchen table, peeling potatoes for the next day. Harlan stood by the stove, arms crossed. "You did good with them today," he said. She glanced up. "They are good boys." "Still," he said, voice low, "they are not easy. Gilbert's been angry since his mother died. Blames me for not coming back fast enough from the cattle drive." Verity set the knife down. "He is 7. He does not understand grief yet. He only knows what it took." Harlan looked at her like he had not expected that answer, like he saw something in her he had not noticed before. He nodded once, quiet again. "You can have the bed," he said after a moment. "I will take the cot in the barn." "I do not mind the floor," she replied. "I do," he said simply. The next morning the sun rose red over the ridge, and Verity woke in a bed that smelled faintly of pine soap and dust. She found Harlan already outside, splitting wood. His shirt clung to his back, muscles flexing with each swing. She watched him a moment through the window before turning away, cheeks warm. Days passed fast after that. Verity scrubbed floors, cooked meals, mended shirts, and guided the boys back into rhythm. She taught Gilbert to read better and kept Gideon from climbing out onto the barn roof again. Harlan worked dawn to dusk, but every evening he sat at the table with them, quieter than most men but steady. One night a storm rolled in, wind howling through the cracks in the shutters. Gilbert woke screaming, and Verity rushed to his side. She pulled him into her arms, holding him until he calmed. "She died in a storm," he whispered. "I know." Verity said, brushing his hair back. "But this one will pass." In the doorway, Harlan stood watching, his face unreadable. Later, once the boys were asleep again, he stopped her in the hallway. "You did not have to go to him," he said. "Yes, I did." He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You always know just what to do," she shrugged. "I have been through storms too." He stepped closer. "What brought you here, Verity?" She hesitated. "I needed to start over. I had nothing left in Wyoming. No people, no name worth anything, just my hands and the hope someone might need them." His voice was low. "I do." She looked up at him. "You mean the ranch?" "No," he said, and his eyes held hers fast. "I mean me." Something shifted in her chest then. A slow warmth, a steady beat. She did not move away when he brushed his thumb along her cheekbone. "You gave me your bed," she whispered. "You can keep it," he said. "If you want." She did not answer with words. She stepped closer, rested her forehead against his chest, and let herself breathe him in. That night, she did not sleep alone. And in the morning, the boys ran into the kitchen to find her at the stove, Harlan behind her, reaching past to take down a mug for her coffee like they had been doing it forever. Gilbert narrowed his eyes again. "Are you going to stay?" Verity looked at Harlan. He answered for her. "She is staying." Gideon grinned. "Then can we call her Ma?" Verity's eyes filled before she could stop it. She crouched and pulled them both into a hug. "If you want to," she said. Later that week, Harlan took her hand as they stood by the fence, watching the boys chase each other across the yard. "I want to give you more," he said. "Not just a place to stay, not just the bed. I want to give you my name." She blinked up at him. "Harlan, I mean to marry you, Verity Temple, if you will have me." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I will." He kissed her then, right there in the open air as the sun dipped low and the wind softened. And for the first time in years, Verity knew she was home. Verity stood ankle-deep in the spring creek behind the barn, skirts gathered in one hand, the hem wet where it brushed the water. She leaned forward, scrubbing a ragged shirt on the washboard, the scent of lye soap and pine filling the air. The sun warmed her back, and the steady burble of water braided with the distant sound of hooves in the pasture. Behind her, the grass rustled. She looked up to see Gilbert balancing carefully along a fallen log, arms out, brow furrowed with concentration. Gideon crouched at the edge of the bank, poking at a crawdad with a stick. Neither of them noticed her watching, but she studied them all the same, their quiet play, the ease returning to their limbs. The house had grown louder lately, not with grief but with the sort of noise that meant life was returning. She wrung out the shirt and laid it flat on a nearby rock, then reached for the next one. It was Harlan's. The collar was worn, a seam coming loose near the shoulder. "You always work this hard, or just when someone's watching?" Harlan's voice came from behind. She didn't turn. "Just when someone's breathing," he chuckled, low and warm. "Fair enough." She glanced over her shoulder. He had his hat in his hand, hair tousled from the ride-in. There was dust on his boots and a smear of grease at his wrist. "Something break?" she asked, nodding to the barn. "Wagon axles cracked. I'll ride into Hamilton tomorrow for timber. Might take the boys with me, let them pick out seed packets for the garden. They'll like that," she said, setting the shirt aside. "Gilbert asked me yesterday if corn grows faster if you talk to it." Harlan crouched beside her, watching the shirt soak in the creek. "Did you tell him it does?" "I told him it couldn't hurt." He dipped his hand in the water, let it run through his fingers. A silence stretched between them, not heavy but full. She let it settle. He glanced over at her. "You know, I never expected this. This? You, here. Fitting like you've always been in that kitchen, or by that fire, or in my bed." She turned toward him slowly, heart tightening. "You don't regret it?" "No," he said. "Not once. But I do wonder what you had to walk through to get here." She studied his face. There were creases near his eyes now, ones she hadn't noticed before, not from age but from squinting into sun and sorrow. "I made a mistake," she said. "Years back. Trusted a man who spoke sweet but left me with nothing but debt and a name he didn't bother to make honest. I worked at a boarding house in Cheyenne to pay it off. A woman there taught me how to hold my chin up, even if my boots were worn through." Harlan's hand found her knee steady. "I want you to know," she said, voice low, "I won't run. Not from hard days, not from your boys, not from you." "I know," he said. "That's why I asked you to marry me." Later that evening, with the shirts dried and folded, Verity stood beside Harlan as he repaired the chicken coop. She held the lantern while he hammered a board into place, the glow flickering across his face. When he straightened, he leaned against the post and looked out toward the house. "I've been thinking," he said, "about building a second room. That corner near the stove gets too warm come summer." "Boys'll sleep better if they've space," she nodded. "And if you wall off the porch, you could hang a swing for Gideon." He looked at her, smile faint. "You already see it like yours." "It is," she said simply. The next morning, with the wagon loaded, Harlan lifted Gideon up by the waist and settled him beside his brother on the bench. Verity handed Gilbert a cloth sack of dried apples and jerky, then turned to Harlan. "Be careful on the road," she said. He met her gaze. "I always am, but I'll be quicker about it now." She kissed the edge of his jaw, right where the stubble met skin. Neither of them said anything more. The boys whooped as the wagon pulled away, dust rising behind them. The rest of the day passed quiet. Verity baked a pie with the last of the dried cherries, patched the seat of Gilbert's trousers, and read a few pages of the almanac by lamplight. When the wagon returned near dusk, she stepped out just as the wheels creaked into the yard. Gideon flung himself down and ran to her, a dirt-smeared envelope in hand. "We got seeds." Gilbert held up a tin box, pride gleaming. "And nails for the coop." Harlan climbed down, arms full of lumber. "We'll start on the garden tomorrow." That night, as the family sat around the table and passed the pie tin back and forth, Harlan reached for Verity's hand beneath it. She laced her fingers with his, and for a while no one spoke. It was enough to just be together, fed and home. The wedding was quiet. Harlan asked Reverend Bell from the settlement east of the river to come out, and the man rode in with a Bible wrapped in oilcloth and a worn pair of gloves tucked into his belt. They stood beneath the cottonwood behind the house, where the trunks split into 3 thick branches and the grass grew high and soft. Gilbert and Gideon wore shirts with the sleeves rolled neat, their hair combed and damp. Gideon clutched a bouquet of bluebells he'd picked that morning without anyone asking. Verity wore her best calico, the one with the tiny indigo flowers and the hem she had stitched twice to keep even. Her hands didn't shake when she took Harlan's, but something in her chest loosened the way a knot gives under steady fingers. Afterward, they ate cornbread and cold chicken on the porch steps and passed around the last jar of preserved peaches. No one made speeches. Gideon fell asleep against her side before the sun dipped behind the ridge, and when Harlan carried him in, Gilbert stayed close behind, bare feet silent on the floorboards. That night, Verity lay beside her husband with the window open and the breeze lifting the edge of the curtain. His arm rested across her hip, and his breath was slow against her shoulder. She kept her eyes on the ceiling, listening to the wind through the trees, and felt something she hadn't since she was a girl safe. By late May, the garden rows had sprouted in straight green lines, and Verity knelt in the dirt most mornings, weeding between beets and carrots while the boys collected rocks to line the edge. Harlan built the second room off the back of the house, the hammering steady and calm. He let Gilbert hold the level and asked Gideon which way the window should face. They chose the eastern side, so the sun would catch their pillows first thing. One afternoon, Verity sat on the porch step, stitching a button onto one of Harlan's shirts. Her needle moved sure through the cloth, but her thoughts drifted. Across the yard, Harlan was oiling the hinges on the barn door, his hat tipped low. When he straightened, he caught her watching. "You always look at me like that?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. She didn't look away. "Only when I'm thinking how much I like what I see." He came over, crouched beside her, and took the shirt from her lap. "You ever miss the woman you were before all this?" She considered that, fingers curling in her lap. "I think she had to wear too many masks to survive. I don't miss her. I'm just sorry she had to do so much pretending." He touched her cheek with the back of his hand. "You don't pretend now." "No," she said. "I don't." That night, after the boys had gone to sleep in their new room, Harlan sat at the table with a pencil in hand, marking figures in the ledger. Verity dried the last plate and leaned against the doorframe. "You ever think about taking on more cattle?" she asked. He looked up. "You think we can manage it? With the pasture east of the creek lying empty?" "I do." He leaned back, arms crossed. "I'll ride out there tomorrow. Check the fencing." She crossed to him, laid her hand on his shoulder. "I can handle the house." "I know you can." In early June, a letter arrived from Cheyenne. It was addressed in the stiff hand of Mrs. Aldridge, the widow who had run the boarding house where Verity once worked. Inside was a folded note, and a pair of silver hair clips Verity had left behind in her rush to leave. She held them in her palm, the metal still smooth, still hers. That night she wore them to bed, hair pinned up and throat bare. Harlan noticed the moment she stepped into the room and reached for her without a word. The next morning, Verity found a pair of polished leather boots outside the boys' room. Inside was a note from Gilbert in crooked pencil lines. "For the wedding you didn't get to have." He had scrubbed the boots himself. She tucked the note into her apron pocket and wore the boots that Sunday when they rode to town together for supplies. Folks nodded at her different now, not as the hired help, not as the outsider. As the woman who kept the Beck place upright, as his wife. That evening, after the boys had fallen asleep with dirt still under their fingernails, and the kitchen smelled faintly of molasses, Harlan poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. They sat on the porch steps side by side, not speaking for a long time. Finally, he said, "You reckon we'll be all right, you and me?" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think we already are." The stars came out slow, one at a time, and the wind carried the scent of sage and earth. Inside the house, quiet breathing marked the peace they had made. Verity closed her eyes and listened to the stillness. She hadn't come west looking for love. But she'd found it in the hands that built a room for her boys, in the steadiness of a man who asked no questions when she couldn't find the words, and in the way her name sounded when he said it like it belonged. Because now, it did. By midsummer, the earth was cracked and dry beneath the garden rows, and Verity had taken to rising before dawn to carry water from the well in a pair of tin pails. The boys helped when they remembered, but most mornings they were still half asleep on the porch, boots only halfway pulled on, hair sticking out in all directions. She didn't mind. The quiet before the heat settled was her own kind of peace. One morning, Harlan came up behind her as she poured water around the squash vines. He didn't say anything, just took the second pail from her hand and finished the row. When he straightened, he wiped the back of his neck with his sleeve and nodded toward the trees beyond the pasture. "Something's been prowling through the north fence," he said. "Found tracks near the salt lick, too big for coyote." She lowered the empty pail and shaded her eyes. "Bear," he gave a slow nod. "Might be. I'll ride out later, check for claw marks." "Take the rifle," she said. He glanced at her, brow lifted. "You worry now. I've got reason to." He studied her for a beat longer, then leaned in and kissed her cheek, the brim of his hat brushing her temple. "I'll be back before the sun's high." She watched him ride off, the horse's hooves drumming soft against the dry earth. Gideon called from the porch, asking about breakfast, and she turned back toward the house, already thinking of biscuits. That afternoon, the blacksmith's boy rode up with a bundle from town, a bolt of muslin, a letter from Harlan's cousin in Butt, and a note from the school board. Verity unfolded the last one, eyes scanning the tight script. The next term would begin in September, and the Dry Creek schoolhouse was asking after students. She sat with the letter on the porch step, Gideon curled against her side, thumb in his mouth. "Gilbert's ready," she said aloud, though mostly to herself. "He's been ready." Gideon stirred. "Will I go too?" "Not yet," she said, smoothing his hair. "But soon." Later that week, Harlan returned from the north fence with a torn saddlebag and a gouge in the side of one post. "Claw marks," he said. "Fresh. Did you see it?" "No. But it saw me." She followed him to the barn, where he checked every latch and looped new rope across the door. That night, she kept the lantern burning longer than usual and moved the boys' bedding closer to the hearth. The bear didn't come back, but Harlan rode the perimeter each morning for 5 days, eyes on the trees, rifle across his lap. It made Verity restless, not afraid, exactly, but watchful. She took to carrying the hatchet when she walked the trail behind the creek and kept the boys within the fence while they played. One afternoon, as she was mending the hem of her apron out by the clothesline, she heard Gilbert and Gideon arguing by the barn. She didn't get up, she waited, listening. "I'm not a baby," Gideon said, voice high and tight. "You can't even hold the bridle right," Gilbert snapped. "Can two? Show me then." Verity stood and walked around the barn before the quarrel could turn worse. She found them both red-faced, Gideon holding the bridle upside down. "All right," she said, "enough of that. Gideon, watch." She knelt, turned the leather piece the right way, and slipped it over the old mare's nose. "Like this. Hands steady, don't jerk." Gideon watched, face set. Gilbert stood with his arms crossed, but he didn't interrupt. When she finished, she handed the bridle to Gideon. "Try again. Slow," he fumbled, but he got it. She nodded once. "Good." Then she looked at Gilbert. "Let your brother get there in his own time. You're not as far ahead as you think." Gilbert looked down, toe digging into the dirt. "Sorry." She didn't press it, just turned and walked back toward the house, the boys trailing behind her, quiet again. That evening, as the light thinned into gold and the hills turned soft at the edges, Harlan came in carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "From town," he said, setting it on the table. "For you." She opened it carefully. Inside was a pair of sewing shears, smoother and sharper than the ones she'd been using, and a spool of deep green thread. "You said you were out," he said, watching her face. She ran her fingers over the handles. "You remembered. I see everything." She looked up at him, heart tightening. "Why green?" he shrugged. "Same color as that dress you wore the first week, the one with the flowers." She reached for his hand, folding it into her own. "I'll make something new with it." "Good," he said. "I'd like to see you in something you stitched for yourself for once." The heat broke the following day, a storm rolling in with wind that bent the trees sideways and chased dust across the yard. Verity got the boys inside just as the first drops hit the roof. Harlan barred the windows, and they all sat close by the hearth while the thunder cracked and the rain hissed against the porch roof. Gilbert leaned into her side, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he didn't pull away when she put an arm around him. When the storm passed, the air smelled clean again. New shoots stood taller in the garden, and the world looked more certain somehow. That night, with the boys asleep and the windows wide to let the cool in. Harlan sat beside her on the bed and laced his fingers through hers. "I think I forget sometimes," he said quietly, "how much life can fit inside a quiet day." She turned toward him, her voice low. "This is the first place I ever felt steady enough to notice." He kissed her forehead, then her mouth, and when she lay back against the pillow, she pulled him with her. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a hymn, and inside, nothing needed saying. Their hands spoke for them, sure, warm, certain. And in the dark, with the sounds of home around them, Verity finally slept without waking. By August, the grass along the lower pasture had gone brittle underfoot, and the pine scent thickened in the air as the days shortened. A stillness had settled across the land, the kind that meant harvest was near, and the hard edge of summer had begun to soften. Verity stood beneath the eaves of the barn, a basket of eggs in one arm, watching as Harlan and Gilbert worked a new gate into place along the south fence. The boy's hands were steadier now, almost grown in the way he held a hammer and followed his father's nods without hesitation. She stepped into the shade once the sun reached the ridge line and crossed to the house, where Gideon sat on the porch with his slate, tongue between his teeth as he traced out letters. He looked up as she passed. "Ma," he said, eyes squinting against the light, "what comes after R?" She crouched beside him and pointed. "S, then T, like the start of strawberry." He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his work without another word. Inside, she set the basket on the counter, brushing dust from the folds of her apron. The kitchen was warm with the smell of yeast and ash bread rising slow in the Dutch oven, coals banked for supper. She checked the pot, then moved to the side table where a half-sewn muslin curtain waited, needle still threaded from the night before. By the time the boys washed up and sat down to eat, the air had cooled and the windows stood open to let in the dusk. Harlan reached for a second slice of bread, breaking it in half before passing a piece to Verity beside him. He didn't speak much at meals, but the way his hand brushed hers when he set down the dish said enough. After the table was cleared and the boys settled with their whittling knives on the back step, Harlan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. "You know," he said, "I got word from the feed store. They're looking for someone to tally orders and keep the books come winter." She set down the dish towel. "You want to take it on?" "I was thinking you might." Verity paused. "Me, you've got a steadier mind for numbers than I do." "They'd pay fair and it'd give you something of your own." She studied him, uncertain. "You sure?" Harlan nodded once. "I didn't marry you to keep you behind a stove." She stepped toward him, drying cloth forgotten in her hand. "It's not the work that matters. It's that you ask like it's a choice." "It is." She let her fingers rest on his chest, feeling the slow rise and fall beneath her palm. "Then I'll consider it." "Good," he said, voice low. "I want you to have the kind of life that holds more than just tending to what's mine." Later that night, when the boys were asleep and the wind had died down, Verity sat at the foot of their bed, folding the last of the laundry. Harlan sat beside her, his shirt unbuttoned, shoulders relaxed. "Gilbert's getting tall," she said. "Outgrew those breeches again." "I noticed." He picked up the folded shirt she'd finished and smoothed the edge. "You've done more for them in 3 months than I managed in the year before." She met his gaze. "You kept them breathing. That counts for something. They needed more than that. And now they have it." He reached for her hand, fingers calloused and warm. "I never thought I'd get another chance at this." "You didn't," she said, voice steady. "You built this one." He drew her close then, hand at her back, and kissed her like he meant to remember it. They didn't speak after that, didn't need to. The house was dark except for the low flame of the lantern, and the quiet between them was full of knowing. They undressed slow, not out of caution but out of reverence, and when he laid her down, the floor creaked beneath them like it had been waiting for the weight of their lives to settle into it. In the weeks that followed, the garden gave up its last beans, and the boys helped cut the stalks and turn the soil. Verity accepted the offer from the feed store, riding into town twice a week to keep their records in order. Harlan took on a few extra cattle from a neighbor whose hip had gone bad, and the boys started their mornings earlier to help with chores. One night in September, they sat by the fire, Verity stitching, Harlan reading from the paper, the boys half asleep with their heads leaning against each other. Verity looked up and caught Harlan watching her, one page still in his hand. "What is it?" she asked. "I keep thinking I'll wake up one morning and find it was all a trick of the light." She laughed, low and soft. "It isn't. I know. But I still pray thanks every night like it might be." She set her stitching aside and slipped across the floor to sit beside him, her head against his chest, his arm closing around her. "You don't have to earn this," she said. "You just have to keep showing up." "I will." She tilted her face toward his. "So will I." Fall came in slow, golden waves, and the days grew shorter, the nights cooler. They stacked firewood beneath the porch, strung dry beans in the pantry, and pickled what they could. Harlan built another shelf in the kitchen, and when Verity filled it with jars, he stood back and looked at it like it meant something more than food. "You planning to stay forever?" he asked one morning as they walked the fence line, frost still clinging to the grass. "I already did," she said. And in the spring, when the wildflowers bloomed again and the creek ran high with meltwater, Verity found herself standing in the same spot where she'd first met the boys, now watching them race each other barefoot through the grass, laughter rising like birds from the field. Harlan came up beside her, one hand resting easy on her lower back. "Looks like we made it through the winter," he said. She turned toward him, eyes lit with something bright and settled. "We'll make it through the next one, too." He bent and kissed her, slow and certain, the wind tugging gently at the brim of his hat. And there, with the land green again and the roof solid above them, with their sons growing strong and their hands entwined, Verity and Harlan Beck stood in the middle of a life they'd built together, quiet, honest, and whole. They never looked back. They never had to.